Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. We've got Garrett Rudolph, and we've also got Greg James of Marijuana Venture. Garrett is the editor, the founder, CEO, also publisher. Greg, appreciate you guys being on the Talking Hedge.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I want to talk a little bit about Marijuana Venture Magazine. I also want to talk about Interchange. I also want to talk about the RAD Expo, the Retail and Dispensary Expo. But let's start off with the Marijuana Venture Magazine. Tell me a little bit about how you guys got involved and where you guys are at with the magazine.
I guess I'll go first, Garrett. I had this building down in South Seattle. It was about 120,000 square foot office warehouse building. And I started to get a bunch of phone calls in around 2013 from people who were interested in growing in the building. Well, the building was completely leased out. And at the time, I had a CD-ROM publishing company that had peaked at about 60 million a year in sales, in 2000 or 2004, but was rapidly going downhill with the internet. I also had a cabin over in Eastern Washington, and Garrett was the editor of a paper over there called the OMAC Chronicle, and I always liked the way he wrote and put that paper together. And he wrote a column saying he was leaving the paper, and I saw that right about the same time. I thought, that there would be a good opportunity maybe to do a serious business magazine for the cannabis industry. And I just shot him an email and said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "Count me in." And he came over here, and that was kind of how we started it. And it started out as a 16-page newsletter that we just mailed to Washington license people who had applied for licenses, and it just grew from there, and it grew really quickly. And Garrett can chime in here, but I think we got to about 100 pages and glossy within 6 months.
Yeah. Started out as an 8-page black and white newsletter. I think it was actually issue number 10 that hit 100 pages. It's been growing ever since. First issue published March, I believe it was March 13 of 2014. So we're coming right up on 7-year anniversary. It's kind of ended up being, I guess, kind of the right timing for a publication like that. Obviously at the time we didn't really know whether or not there would be people wanting to read this type of a magazine, and we also didn't really know if there would be advertisers that would be wanting to reach cannabis business owners. So it kind of started off small and it grew organically, and we found out really quickly that, yes, there was a market for both of those things. There was definitely people who wanted to read, cannabis business information, and there was also definitely advertisers that wanted to reach those business people and those entrepreneurs.
How has it changed over time? I would imagine that you guys have pivoted and adjusted just the industry. So from the early onset, even, with the amount of pages, how is the content? How have you guys evolved? How have you pivoted to stay relevant with Marijuana Venture Magazine?
I think one of the big areas and kind of challenges that I've seen kind of from those early days to now is really kind of the evolution of the state markets. When we first started out, maybe the first 6 months or so, we were solely focused on Washington, and it probably wasn't until about 5 or 6 months in that we started to really branch out into Colorado and then other markets and expand nationally. So we weren't really truly a national magazine until probably about 1 year into publication. And we weren't distributed through the major bookstores like Barnes and Noble until about it was about our 14th or 15th issue. So, in those early days when you're focusing on Washington, you could really kind of focus on kind of some of the minutia of the industry that might not necessarily matter nationally or globally or anything like that, and really drill down on, kind of specific things focused on Washington businesses. And and then as you kind of grow into a national magazine, then you're kind of looking more for national issues, and and you're getting a little bit less into the nitty gritty of each individual state market. So that's kind of one of the things that I've seen as being a challenge, because we're still in this situation where with 35 different states that have legalized medical marijuana and 15 states with adult use cannabis. Every single one of those, there's similarities, but there's very, very independent and unique rules and regulations within each market. So, and then you start talking Canada on top of that, and that's kind of the I think from my perspective, one of the big challenges and changes that we've kind of had to evolve with over the years, just as more states come on board, and as and as those rules and regulations kind of become more and more state specific.
Yeah, I'd like to also add that one of the things that's changed is, our submissions. I mean, we initially, like Eric said, we were all about Washington and then sort of Washington and Colorado and Oregon, and as it's grown. But we get some really great articles from attorneys, for example, who will submit articles specific to the states they work in, both, as well as like federal legalization and their predictions of the future. So I think the quality of the articles that we get submitted to us have become, better and better with time. And it's a great magazine. I mean, I actually like reading some of the stuff. I'll read stuff and go, God, I didn't know that. And that happens fairly regularly.
Well, so before I ask you about crystal ball predictions for 2021 and beyond, what was your past favorite story of 2020?
Well, I mean, marijuana related.
Yeah, industry related. It was if it wasn't something you guys covered, maybe it was something you wanted to cover. What was a story that either pops out in your mind or tickles your fancy for whatever reason? What's a story that that you're thinking about in 2020 that might be a favorite of yours for whatever reason?
Well, I don't know about a specific story, but one of the things that really interested me was just this explosion of hemp and CBD products. I mean, that was we did our first CBD special issue just 2 years ago, and I think I don't know how many products we had featured, maybe 20 or 25, and at the time, CBD. I mean, it was already out there, but it hadn't exploded yet. And then all of a sudden, a year later, I mean, CBD was in damn nearly every store you go into. It was in drugstores. It was on end caps. It was, and then Garrett and I, laughed because, and I gotta be careful what I say, but there's every imaginable CBD product known to man out there, CBD shampoo and CBD pet products and CBD pillows. And, we started to get some of I don't know if the right word's crazy stuff in here, but boy, I'm telling you, there was a CBD product for everything.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna go the same direction. We wrote an article. I think the headline in last year's CBD issue was something to the effect of has CBD jumped the shark? And at the time we were seeing these. It was CBD pillows and it was CBD mattresses and CBD blankets. And the CBD sector has kind of been fascinating to watch just because of how fast it has exploded, and kind of wondering where it's ultimately going to go, and whether that market really has staying power and kind of has will become the multi-billion-dollar market that a lot of people project it to be. But when you look at some of these things, and I actually just got a press release on one of these companies just last week, and to me, just CBD mattresses and CBD blankets and pillows, when you're going to that point, it just feels like that's a sector that has jumped the shark, and I'm not sure. We maybe are still another year away from really knowing what the true CBD market looks like, but I just kind of have a hard time believing that the CBD bedspreads and pillows is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I was talking about the Kyle Turley episode where he's talking about how the pandemic could be cured by CBD and that whole thing that started at the very beginning, but. Yeah, I think maybe one of the more interesting stories is just the consumer behavior change into edibles and away from topicals and tinctures. I thought that was pretty fascinating. So yeah, interesting year.
We've been pretty careful about the stuff we put in the magazine too. I mean, I feel like I have to be careful sometimes saying stuff, but I remember 5 or 6 years ago seeing an ad in another publication that was Rick Simpson oil cures cancer. And I showed it to Garrett, and I'm like, you know what? We're never going to put that kind of stuff in this magazine, unless it comes from a sort of well-known medical, whatever, hospital study. But, we've been very careful right from day one to try to just put out good information, because there is a lot of anecdotal BS in this industry. And, I mean, we've taken heat, early on. I remember I wrote a piece after talking to Bruce Bugbee at Utah State about their study on supplemental plant lighting. And I wrote a short piece about how the double-ended high-pressure sodium was a much more efficient and effective light than the 1,000-watt metal halide, and that no one in commercial agriculture outside of cannabis uses metal halide. And I got some semi-nasty emails from people like, well, what does he know? We've been growing pot for 20 years. He's just a university professor. Like, wait a minute, this guy has a PhD. He's got 10 students or whatever studying lights. It's a study that's, scientific study, peer reviewed. Anyway, it was just kind of weird to me that somebody would think that just because they've been growing pot in their garage for 20 years, they know more than a PhD at a university.
Yeah, and just to go back to that ad Greg was talking about, which actually we can email you if you're interested in seeing it. It wasn't even just kind of the headline of Rick Simpson oil cures cancer. It was the imagery was like this close up of these kind of like black lipstick lips, kind of a very sexual overtones of this ad with the headline that says Rick Simpson oil cures cancer. And I actually think that it was I think that the headline was got cancer, Rick Simpson oil can cure that. And and it's this close up of this this sexy imagery of these black lips, and it's like, I don't know, like who's designing these ads and who is deciding that this is a good thing to publish. Got cancer. I mean,
Dan Blazarian of Ignite. It might have been him.
Yeah, probably.
I'm joking. But what about crystal ball predictions, though? So what do you think is going to happen? Have you guys written any articles about, like last year, the anticipation was some regulatory issues, mergers, international expansion, all of these things, CBD and more rare cannabinoids. Now, after the election, people are all about regulation, legalization. Where is the crystal ball for you guys say that the industry is headed 2021 and beyond?
Well, I think federal legalization is inevitable, right? And I wrote a piece about it probably 6 months ago, simply based on this idea that if you can't tell hemp CBD flower from marijuana THC flower in the field, how the heck can you ever arrest people, right? And, this idea that, if a sheriff arrests some teenagers in rural Missouri or Mississippi or somewhere, throws them in jail because he thinks they got pot and it turns out to be legal hemp CBD, that district attorney and those cops could get sued. The district attorneys in no time at all going to say, look, we can't even prosecute this stuff anymore. So it becomes kind of like a practical thing, right? You can't tell CBD from THC flower. How the heck are you going to arrest people? And so I kind of think, with Biden and also that eventually sometime in the next few years, it'll become federally legal, and then it'll be like alcohol, right? States can regulate it. States like Idaho and Utah or whatever can opt out of recreational pot, and they'll just leave it up to the states.
I agree that generally we're probably looking at federal legalization or at least decriminalization as an inevitability at some point. But I also kind of think that it's honestly going to move a lot slower than I see a lot of people out there predicting. I think you just look at that hemp CBD market, for example. Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill back in whatever it was, December 2018, or maybe it was even early January 2019. And here we are now, January 2021, and we still don't really have a set of clear rules and regulations for commercial hemp and for CBD products, you know. And so, you know, we're talking 2 years down the road for a product that is very much more accepted than you know, than the intoxicating variety of cannabis. Um, you know, it's something that you would have thought, and I think a lot of companies and a lot of, you know, a lot of people thought back in 2019 that the hemp and CBD market was going to just explode overnight because now it's federally legal. You know, now the president has signed off on this, and you know, and you see conservative states like Kentucky and Tennessee, you know, jumping in full bore and saying, you know, yes, we welcome hemp farming. But then you see states like Idaho that arrest truck drivers for shipping hemp across state lines. You know, the final destination wasn't even Idaho. It was just traveling from Oregon to Colorado for processing. So, you know, so I do believe that we are on a path toward full legalization, or, you know, maybe it'll be decriminalization first and then full legalization after that. It just seems inevitable. It seems impossible to have a country where 35 states allow it for medical use, but somehow it's still, you know, federally illegal. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But at the same time, the idea that, you know, Biden's going to sign some legislation and we're going to start moving forward into some, you know, next step of this legal, you know, a legal structure seems, it just doesn't seem like government is capable of moving that quickly.
Yeah, they don't move very fast at all. But you guys have adapted, you guys have changed, you guys have added new things. So pivoting to Interchange, which is like speed dating for producers and processors to meet the retail owners. Tell me a little bit about how that concept came about and what Interchange is for those that are unfamiliar.
Yeah, I can answer that. When I was in the CD-ROM business, so my company did a lot of the big brands like National Geographic and Rand McNally and all the World Book on Encyclopedia on CD-ROM. We had a trade show back then called Interchange. So I'm not going to claim it was a completely original idea. But, you know, with that industry, you know, you had Staples based in Boston, Barnes & Noble in New York, Best Buy and Target in Minneapolis, CompUSA was based in Dallas, Fry's is the Bay Area. Anyway, long story short, they took the buyers and they put them all in one hotel. A distributor put the show together. They took all the buyers to the major retailers, put them in a hotel for a weekend. And then we vendors came and pitched them on products. And back then it included Microsoft and Symantec and all the big companies. And we paid, I think it was $15,000 for a weekend. And every hour you would have a different meeting with a different buyer in their room and rotate around. And I thought, that's just a great idea for this industry because you can't legally mail samples to buyers. And people in Washington State were driving all over to take samples to the retailers. So basically, we structured it pretty much the same way. The retail buyer has a booth, and then every half hour, a vendor comes, sits down and has a half hour, 20-minute meeting with them and a 10-minute break, and then pitches them on their product and then moves on to the next meeting. And it's all scheduled. The first one, I think we had about 25 retail buyers there. And ever since then, it's been a sellout. We keep it to about 50, but it's a super, super efficient, effective way of doing it. It's free, of course, for the retailers, right? The buyers just send their buyer there, and the vendors pay to come and have the meetings over 2 days. And we're now on Interchange number 9. It sells out every single time, and we've, you know, had countless people say, "God, it was the best 2 days of meetings I've ever had." So pretty successful.
And have you had to switch to online? Is it virtual now, or are you guys just waiting? How's that working post-pandemic?
We've had to delay our, we ended up not doing any Interchange events in 2020. And we've kind of just been looking for, I guess, the right timing to do the next one in person. We haven't done any virtual events. We've tossed around the idea, but kind of at its core, we really believe that the value of Interchange is that face-to-face meeting, and is that personal contact, and is kind of that, that traditional business networking opportunity. And we just have never really felt like you could recreate that in a virtual setting. So yeah, unfortunately, 2020 was kind of a dud in terms of Interchange, and now we've got the next one scheduled for April, and we're kind of just keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that that will be safe to do at that time.
Will hardware and software in the future bridge that gap for those that can't and or don't want to make it? In other words, will virtual reality headsets and virtual reality software make up for not being able to be there in person?
I would assume it would close the gap. I'm not really sure that it will ever completely eliminate it. But I also don't know that we can really predict that. I mean, I don't, I certainly wouldn't have, 10 years ago would have believed that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and social media platforms like that would ever hold the power over kind of our culture the way that they do today. And yet here we are. So I guess I would say, far be it from me to to predict what might possibly be how software and hardware technologists might bring us into the future 5 years from now. But I just have a hard time seeing that gap really being significantly closed.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that of all the business things out there, right? It's the like the conference or trade show was the one thing that was specifically organized and put together to get people to meet face to face, right? So, I mean, a perfect example is I've been going to the Consumer Electronics Show for 25 years, and it's always been big, and it's always been popular, and it's always been in Vegas because, people just want to go and meet the people that they are talking to or emailing or texting or whatever messaging on social media. They want to go meet those people. So I know it's sticking my neck out a little bit, but I kind of just don't think that in-person trade events are ever going to go away. They're there for a reason. That's why they were designed in the first place, so you could actually meet your customer.
Well, tell me a little bit about the RAD Expo, the Retail and Dispensary Expo. Tell me about how you guys got started with that and what it's all about.
Well, I'll start on that one. One of the things I learned in the software business, Josh, was that way back, if you remember, in the early '90s, Comdex was the world's biggest trade show. It was in Vegas. It was everything to do with consumers and what happened with computers, rather. Sorry. And then what happened was it split. So E3 split off as the gaming show. The Consumer Electronics Show became sort of the hardware show. The internet guys did their own show. The mobile guys did their own show. And then all in one hodgepodge trade show sort of went away, which was what Comdex was. We kind of believe that, and I really do believe that the marijuana business is several different businesses all within one, right? You've got cultivation, which is essentially farming. You've got the dispensaries and retailers, which is basically retailing, and then you've got the guys who are sort of the refining and distributing. And I think they all deserve their own trade shows. We had our idea for RAD came about because a lot of the retailers in Washington weren't going to MJ Biz. They're like, dude, why do I need to go look at greenhouses? I don't care about greenhouses and fertilizer and all that stuff. So we launched the Retail Dispensary Expo as a trade show specifically for people on the retail side of the business.
And that's an event that's in Portland, and you travel around to other parts of the country. How often do you have it?
Well, again, like Garrett said, we kind of got messed with last year. So we had one scheduled, we had to cancel it. So we're sort of regrouping and getting everything going again. But I am convinced that the retail side of the industry is different enough from the cultivation side that they deserve two different trade shows. Um, I always tell cultivators, if you really want to go to a good trade show for the cultivation side of the business, there is actually a show called Cultivate. It's in Columbus, Ohio. I think it's in July. And it's the world's largest controlled environment agriculture trade show. And all the greenhouse guys are there and all the lighting guys are there. And it's not cannabis specific, but that's the show people on the cultivation side should go to because everybody's there. They have like 700 or 800 booths. And getting back to the biz I was in before, like they have trade events for just truck stops for the retailers, right? And so I think my theory is that the cannabis retailers and dispensaries, they just need their own trade event, right? Because most of them don't care about greenhouses and nutrients and grow lights and all that kind of stuff.
How do you see the RAD Expo, in 2021 or even 2022? What you said events might not go back to normal. Like, what is events post-pandemic? What's that going to look like in the future?
Go, Garrett. Well, I think we'll get back to doing regular trade shows. And one of the things, Josh, that we are doing with RAD is we're going to spend more time on getting really great speakers from traditional big retailers like Nordstrom, Costco, Zoomies, The Gap, to speak about things that we're learning at the time, because you alluded earlier to, what have we learned? Well, one of the things we've learned is that a lot of these retail stores and dispensaries don't actually really know a whole lot about a lot of important things like vendor managed inventory, inventory controls, turns, cost averaging, buying practices, and a lot of that kind of stuff. So the next event that we do, which I think we're going to do in Seattle, we're going to have a lot of speakers who come from big retail who can address specific issues like that, right? Because like inventory is a huge one. I mean, even companies like Costco and Walmart and Target and Best Buy and Amazon, it's the same thing. Like inventory is just a gigantic issue with any retailer, how to have the right amount of inventory on hand. And so we're planning on, having speakers who can speak to those kinds of things that come from traditional retail.
That's awesome. If anyone's interested in Interchange or the Retail Dispensary Expo or Marijuana Venture Magazine, what are some links out there and how can people get a hold of you?
Easiest way is just through our Marijuana Venture website, www.marijuanaventure.com. We do have websites for Interchange and for the Retail and Dispensary Expo, but you can find all those, directly through the Marijuana Venture website.
Perfect. All right. I want to thank my guest, Garrett Rudolph. He is the editor at Marijuana Venture Magazine. Greg James, publisher, Marijuana Venture Magazine. You guys are also with Interchange and the Retail and Dispensary Expo. I appreciate you guys being on the Talking Hedge.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.